This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And we are back with our final, probably final, I don't know, who knows?
Better be final.
Okay, there you go. A message to the Trump and Harris campaigns. It better be final. This better be the last Sunday of this election season, when we have been getting together on Sundays to talk about this election, not just past elections, a little bit of a historical lens, but we've really enjoyed doing these. And of course, it is the last Sunday before Election Day itself. And I am joined, as always, by Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, and happy almost Election Day.
Is that what you're calling it? Almost Election Day?
Almost Election Day.
Hey there.
I'm sure we have a ton of voters who have already voted. I don't know if either of you have already voted.
I have.
You have? I have not.
Like
I like to go
ago.
on Election Day itself. Does that mentally change anything for you? I'm curious. Because for
like
me,
to
it's always like
punish yourself?
Election Day. No, but do you feel like the election?
I don't want to wait in long lines. Okay. So, I mean, and thankfully, I've said this many times before, but I'm in a small town. And so like a long line is relative. But I mean, I've seen places where my parents are in Houston and it's like a 6-hour line, a 5-hour line. Yeah. And I'm like, no, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I was always like you, Jody, somebody who like wanted to go on Election Day. I had a whole ritual built around it. There was always an election night party, and things changed. Things began to break down in 2016, 2020. Obviously, I was living in New York and wanted to go at the point when no one would be around me because I didn't want to get COVID. And then this year, part of it was just wanting to kind of like get the vote banked and go on a day when I was like, okay, I can go to the gym and then I can go vote and then I can go to the grocery store and then I will have done my civic duty and also will have food in my fridge. And I feel like that kind of mentality was also, I thought it would be a little like anticlimactic, but it was actually kind of like, oh, right. Like, if this is an expression of who you are as a citizen, like maybe it should be as routine as going to the gym or going to the grocery store and doing a car wash. And there was something kind of nice about that.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah, I wonder if we'll change it to, Results Day because 60% of people
that might be overpromising.
Voted or yes, but whatever it is, like Election Reveal Day,
right?
And
end of Election Day.
Yeah.
I like that though, Niki. I mean, because I think that's part of why I want to go on the days because it feels special and it's sort of ingrained. But I also know for a lot of people, no matter when you step into that booth, it's meaningful. So
do you take Nola with you? Do you make it a family affair?
Yeah. I'm going to take her for sure. And
that's great.
So outside of the election, how are things going? I'll tell you the reason I'm a little late to this recording. Listeners can note that I was a little late to this recording. It's because it's Marathon Day here in New York, which is my favorite day of the year, bar none. I find the New York City Marathon as a spectator and as a community event to be really like the best expression of everything I love about this city. I mean, it is so diverse. People are just pushing themselves. I'm a sucker for sort of athletic achievement and athletic
an underdog
performance. Exactly. And, there's music and people are, and our PTA at my school, which is on the block, did a bake sale, which was great. It is also, though, I've been in New York long enough and I've been going to the marathon long enough. Every 4 years, I guess every kind of 2 years, there's the sort of election marathon nexus. And it is this like emotional mix of like everything I love about New York and this really feel good. We're all one. This is a whole community together kind of thing, which is what I love about the marathon. And then also it often takes place on the last Sunday before an election. And in the back of my head, I'm going to be like, you're about to get a dose of how not united we all are in a couple days.
Oh man.
That's
but
very
it is this
true.
interesting mix.
Although I did hear that at some Brooklyn polling places, they were whenever a first time voter showed up, they were announcing like we just had a first time voter, and people would like cheer in
Oh, that's
line,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
that's very marathon-esque to
Yeah,
me.
for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's the same way in Boston too. I used to take my
Yeah.
kids every year to go see, just to cheer people on. Even if I didn't know anyone that was running, it didn't matter. It was a very
Yeah.
good feeling.
No, it's lovely. Niki, how are things with you?
I just finished my last pre-election trip. I was out at Cornell doing a panel with friend of the show, Jamel Bowie, and a couple of other folks on the impending election. And that was great. Like there's tons of interest in what's happening with the election. People are really looking for assurances that it's going to be okay, which nobody can give them. And then I got home and I was like, oh, right, I need to like clear brush in my backyard and rake leaves and just do very domestic things. And so I have been having a very domestic weekend, which has been really nice too.
Nice.
I took a trip. I meant to give a shout out. I took a trip out to Pomona College
Oh, right.
last week. The Pomona Student Union invited me to come, in part because there's a listener. We have a listener on the Pomona Student Union who's a Pomona student. Shout out to Bianca, who also I went and looked in my email, and Bianca was the person who suggested that we do the "You Forgot Poland" line from the 2004.
I love
And I'm like,
that.
why does an undergraduate at Pomona know about the "You Forgot Poland" line? But I love it. But shout out to the Pomona Student Union for having me out there. It was a very lively and interesting discussion.
That's awesome.
And it's great to know we have listeners out there. But
Yeah.
I just wanted to sneak that in. Kellie, what's new with you?
So yeah, I had just a little tiny debacle over the course of last week, really. So I had a sign that I bought for Harris weeks ago. I bought it in August. Took 6 weeks to show up
Yeah.
because it took a long time to get it. And then I was pulling out of my driveway and I noticed, my sign is gone. And so I text my next door neighbor, like, hey, my sign is gone. And she was like, yeah, my sign's gone too. Matter of fact, they took it last week. I was like,
Thieves.
last week? I had been traveling, so I completely missed it. So I took to my message boards because that's what I do. My group chats, my group chats and my social medias. And I'm like, what in the world? I'm pissed. Somebody took my sign. Like I was so mad. And because it just feels like a violation, somebody going onto your property, like taking it's such a violation. Whether you agree or not, it doesn't matter. Like, so of course, one of my good mommy friends was like, I will make you a homemade sign. And like she got construction paper, like made a sign, put little cats on it, and like waterproofed it, stuck it in my yard. Like I was like, I have the best neighbors.
I mean, waterproofing is next level.
I know. I was like, really? Like,
Wait, now before you tell us, I don't know if you were about to tell us what you've discovered. I'm curious to see. But
yes.
were you sure when it first happened that this was politically motivated?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Yeah.
And I say that only because our town, I would say, is pretty blue. But this election, I have seen more Trump signs than normal, more than I would have expected in 2020 for sure. And so it's weird too, because like all of us neighbors, we're a pretty close-knit community. And so it's weird when you see like rows of like Harris signs and then you see a Trump sign like 2 doors down and you're like, but I know that
Yeah.
person. Like, and they're like, really? But like, it's so but the funny thing is that even my friend who's 2 doors down, who does have a Trump sign, was like, Kellie, that's really messed up. Nobody should be stealing signs. Like, I hope you get a new one. And then a bunch of other people were like, here's where you can get new ones. We've got signs yet. It was like all this coordination where all of a sudden people had like 5 signs
Yeah.
for me. I'm like, I don't need 5 signs. But I was really like, oh wow, this actually, when people, disappoint you with theft, and then it just surprises me how much people can also like just bless you with kindness and
Yeah.
like, generosity. And so I noticed that in my town too, like as I'm exiting my town, there is a ginormous, and when I say ginormous, I mean like the size of a billboard Trump sign. It's massive. Like even I've seen some big signs, and this sign is like huge. And it was like hung up by like strings, basically, like a massive banner. And I was like, wow, that's big. And people would talk about it or whatever. Did you see that sign? Yada, yada, yada. So as I'm driving back home today, I noticed that the sign is down and I was like, huh. And they put up another sign that's just as big, but now it's on wood like planks. So somebody apparently cut down their
Was
sign
snipping it.
and then they took another sign and put it on like 2x4s on the like this
Mhm.
makeshift wood sign. And then they parked 3 cars in front of the sign so that no one would mess with the sign. And I was like, wow. So it's on both sides. Like
The
Yeah.
it's
sign
getting
wars are
intense.
happening.
It's getting intense. And so, I don't know what to make of it. I've always kind of felt like, you vote however you want to vote, but like it's taking down someone's sign to me just feels like, or stealing someone's sign just feels like petty and violating.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to make of it, but yeah, it's been going around a lot. And the fact that on the group chats, a lot of people had said, my sign's been stolen. My sign's been stolen too. Um, it's just wild.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see how signs become symbolic of the political contentions that are playing out and how invested people get because of that sense of violation. So you see
Yeah.
people like drenching their signs in oil so that if somebody tries to steal them, they just get like really gross hands, or they'll put air tags on them so they can
Yeah,
hunt them down, which
I've heard about this.
I do
How
not
much does an
recommend.
AirTag cost?
I
My
don't
gosh.
know. And also, why are you confronting someone
I
who
know.
stole your sign?
No,
I
I know.
don't
I
feel like
wouldn't
that's
want to
going
do
to
that.
end well.
No.
No, it's not.
But like
No,
that's,
it's not.
and that goes for anything just outside of politics. It's like the petty neighbor, like follow up, like you don't want to poke that bear.
No,
But yeah, I mean,
no.
look, this we've talked about it on the show. I think it's a sort of pretty clear, analysis of the moment that like political identity and political allegiance has just infected everything, and so here it's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, it's just like, it's a stupid little neighbor squabble. On the other hand, it kind of symbolizes everything that I think is pretty broken right
I
now.
mean, yeah. I mean, it's so funny because taking my kids trick or treating, we're going door to door, and my son is like, "Mom, they have a Trump sign,"
Yeah.
and I was like, "It's okay. They're giving out candy just like everybody else
Kit Kat is a
does.
Kit Kat,
They
That's
say
right.
Happy Halloween and say thank you. You know what I mean?" And so they did, but it's like, but I noticed just how even much kids are paying attention to like, team blue, team red. Like it's very it's a lot. And it's
Yeah.
actually a little disturbing because, there was a time, believe it or not, where you could, be a Democrat and married to a Republican.
Yeah.
Like you could
Or
like
just not know someone's, I mean, not know your neighbor's
or
Right.
not know
politics.
at all
And people
somewhere
trot
somewhere.
out, yeah, you hear these stories from people who are like, you know, in their 50s or 60s, and they're like, yeah, I was this person's, coworker and best sort of work
Yeah.
friend for 30 years, and I never once knew whether they were a Republican or a Democrat. And, that
Yeah.
just doesn't happen now. So you now have this handmade sign is back in front of your.
It's
Okay,
cute.
good. And do you
Adorable.
feel a
And
need
I have a
to?
new sign too that me and my neighbor share. I put it like right in between our properties
Mhm.
so we can, since her sign was stolen too. And
Right. And do you feel
Socialism.
a need to find out who did it, or you're good to just keep it
no,
moving?
I'm good. I mean, like, I feel like I've replaced one sign with two. So, like and I think for me, the stakes aren't that high. I mean, it would be different if you're like stealing mail or
Yeah.
like stealing, something of a major consequence, a bike. I don't know.
A ballot.
But yeah, a ballot. Yeah. Can we say that? But like, but no, I
Yeah.
think, and I wonder too, like after Tuesday or after we have results, will people still keep their signs up or when will do you remember like in 2020, there was that running joke, like people had all these Black Lives Matter signs up and they're like, when can I take it down?
Yeah.
Like, like, is that bad? Like,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know if I
Not
take
great.
it down. Like,
That's funny.
so it's, I don't know how long you keep signs up for, but it will
Yeah.
be interesting.
Mhm.
All right, so I want to get your thoughts on the sort of where we are in this race, and the sort of even the last couple of days have had some interesting news. But actually, your talk of lawn signs, I think, sets up something that I wanted to play for our listeners, which I think I've referenced a few times on the show. But we did this live show in Boston on October Surprises. We've run the conversation from that, and afterwards we had a sort of Q&A with the audience that was there, the great audience that was there, and we got a question from a person in the audience who was basically like, I think the question was basically, can we just get rid of all the polling that we're inundated with? And I think this listener was expressing something we've all felt, which is just, it feels like we're flooded with polling. There's a whole sort of like obsession with polling that is a sort of media ecosystem on its own. and it just, what good does it do? And we had a nice little exchange, and I want to play for folks what kind of my response was to it, which was a bit of a defense of polling, or especially a defense of polling as part of the way in which you try and understand the state of the race. So here's a little bit from our live show in Boston on polling, and then we'll come back. We can react to that, talk about some of the latest polling, and talk about the state of the race. But take a listen. Look, I did my time in the heart of the polling industrial complex at 538. And, look, I completely agree that the sort of narratives that explode out of polling, the obsession over it is absurd. I came to believe that polling is the best way to start an inquiry about what's happening in an election. It is a relatively rigorous way to kind of organize your thinking, but it is the start of the way that you should try and understand an election, not the be-all and not a prediction. But before polling and reporting about polling and the kind of like last 15 years of polling obsession we've lived in, reporters, when they wanted to know what was happening in elections, would write about lawn signs. Like they would just think about the other ways that you can try and organize your thinking about what's happening in an election. They would go out there, they'd go to one rally and pick up the vibe, talk to 3 people, and then write a front page New York Times article about it. Or they talk about the lawn signs in Ohio or whatever. I will take something a little more rigorous than that any day. Yes, I agree there are lots of problems, but when you compare it to the other ways that political journalism can begin to try and organize the state of a race, I kind of think it still might be the best place to start, or using it as one of the sort of tools of inquiry alongside a lot of other things.
Before we get started, we want to tell you some exciting news from our friend and fellow Radiotopian Nate DeMeo. For 15 years, Nate's been telling incredible stories about the past on his podcast, The Memory Palace. Each episode, though short, only about 15 to 20 minutes long, finds beauty and meaning in history's dustier corners. The show's been a finalist for a Peabody Award. Nate's been artist in residence at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And now he's releasing his first book, The Memory Palace, True Short Stories of the Past. It collects for the first time beloved stories from the show and new stories you'll only find in the book, plus photographs, gorgeous illustrations, dozens of magical little stories. It's available for pre-sale now and on November 19th wherever you buy your books, including Radiotopia.fm. If you love listening to your books, the audiobook version will be really special too, read by Nate and an amazing cast of voices ranging from Rishikesh Hirway, host of Radiotopia's own Song Exploder, to actors like Carrie Coon and Ryan Reynolds. So with the holidays coming up, this book would make the perfect gift for the book lover on your list, or that person who's impossible to shop for. The Memory Palace, True Short Stories of the Past. Congrats to our friend Nate, and everyone else, go buy it now.
Spark something uncommon this holiday with just the right gift from Uncommon Goods. The busy holiday season is here, and Uncommon Goods makes it less stressful with incredible hand-picked gifts for everyone on your list or yourself, all in one spot. Let me tell you about my experience with Uncommon Goods. It has so many different kinds of items. It's a perfect site to go to find the thing you want. But it is also the perfect site to stumble upon something you didn't know you wanted until you see it, which is what happened to me with the Berry Buddy Fruit Bowl / strainer. The Berry Buddy. It's a ceramic fruit bowl, but it also has these holes and a little spout in it that you can use to rinse the berries, and then you put them out to eat in the very same bowl. I saw it on Uncommon Goods, and I remembered that months ago I was at a friend's house and I saw one and thought to myself, oh, that's interesting. I should try and get one of those one day. There it was, right on the site, and now there it is, sitting on my counter. Uncommon Goods is full of gifts that spark joy, wonder, delight, and that's exactly what I wanted feeling. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/thisday. That's uncommongoods.com/thisday for 15% off. Don't miss out. It's a limited time offer. Uncommon Goods. We're all out of the ordinary.
We want to tell you about another podcast from PRX called Monumental. This podcast explores questions about the past, present, and future of U.S. monuments, uncovering the stories about what and who is important, as well as the stories that have been left out. Join host Ashley Seaford across the country with their team of journalists. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
So anyway, so that was from our live show, and we're now back here on the Sunday before the election.
It's so funny because when I was at Cornell, there was obviously a lot of election talk over dinner and drinks and those kinds of things. And because polls are so tight right now, because there's so little deviation, one poll to the next, and it's all sort of clustered around a tied race, people were relenting back to the yard sign talk. They were like, well, I was driving through this part of Pennsylvania. I was in this part of Michigan, and these are the signs that I saw. And I was like, ooh, Jody was right. Polls are better than this.
That's true.
Not very scientific.
I know it isn't, but
it's vibes, right? But,
Yeah,
but when
vibes.
polls are like they are right now,
yeah.
vibes is kind of what you have to
Right.
go on if
And-
you want to try to soothe yourself.
And to me, I could offer a defense of vibes too. I mean, like, it's this funny thing where, like, for me covering the 2016, especially the primary, a couple of the, like, I was at 538. A big lesson for me through that process was be rigorous about your thinking, understand the data, take a step back, and see, use the sort of empirical stuff. Another lesson for me was sort of in the opposite direction, which was Trump had the vibes. And a lot of people kind of refused to see that for way too long. And it's like, how do you kind of just like trust your gut and trust your instinct? And I think obviously the answer is everything in moderation. Everything is kind of part of a thing. You don't want to over rely on the vibes reporting. You don't want to over rely on the data. But like, it was a big lesson for me too. It's like, you can't just look at a spreadsheet to understand the nature of a race. And so on that front, I mean, to me, and I'm curious, Kellie, what you think, but in this race, in the last 3, 4, 5 days, basically since that sort of deranged Madison Square Garden rally, the vibes for Harris feel better. But I don't know if that's breaking through to you, Kellie. I don't know if you think
I
it matter,
don't
but what's your
know.
sense?
Every hour it changes. Like so, like, and I say this because, like, depending on who I'm around, the vibes change. So if I'm around like another friend group, people are like, I feel good. I feel like it might even be a landslide. Like people have these like, good feelings. And then I'm around other people and they're like, y'all, just get ready. We need to have like some sort of a circle afterwards. Like they're like very grim. And it's part of the things I think I've been going off too is like voting practices. So sometimes when I hear, especially on podcasts like bro culture, that's very much like, we're going out, we're going to vote for Trump. And I'm like, y'all don't really vote statistically, though. Are you even registered? Like, I think about those things a lot, too, when we think about young voters or young male voters. Like, will they actually get registered and do what it takes to vote? I don't know. I mean, I think about my nephews and like, they won't make their own doctor's appointments. They don't like they won't. I'm like, yo, you have to renew this, right? Like, or if it's a license or something, and they're just sort of a little knucklehead about it. So that I don't know. I go back and forth. But I do feel like this, and maybe this is not helpful, whether Trump wins or Harris wins, I still feel like the work has to continue. You can't sort of like rest on a victory or on a loss. Like the work towards justice is never ending. So yeah, you have to work regardless, is how I feel about it.
Yeah, I feel very strongly in agreement with Kellie about the election not being the end point of the work, but just like a new signal for how easy or how hard it's going to be to do the work. But vibes wise, it's so interesting. First of all, I will say, like, I have gotten into the sort of tick, and I've noticed other people do it too, where every discussion of polls starts with, I mean, I can't tell you who's going to win. It could be either way. It could be anyone. I'm not making a prediction. I'm just saying.
Don't hold
so I'm
on
just
to this.
saying. Like, don't write it down anywhere. I do think that the vibes have shifted toward Harris, and there are particular like things that I've been zeroed in on. We'll see how things turn out. But of course, the thing that everyone was talking about over the past 12 hours or so was the release of the Selzer poll in Iowa that showed Harris ahead 3. And I think that whatever happens in Iowa, we had that poll from Kansas that showed Harris only behind 5. We saw a poll in Ohio that showed her only behind 3. And in these states with really restrictive abortion laws or attempts at really restrictive abortion laws, Texas, I think, she's behind 4. We're seeing something happening. And who knows if it translates to other states, those big swing states, but it's like there's something happening on the periphery of our vision because everyone's so laser focused on these swing states that it's possible that we're missing a bigger shift that's happening, particularly among women, that if you turn somebody into a second-class citizen overnight and you leave them the right to vote, they're going to vote. And they're going to vote hard. And I think one of the things that will be really interesting to see on election night is how much this is happening in places that we just haven't been paying a ton of attention to. And even if it doesn't necessarily change the outcome of the Electoral College, it could easily have an effect on down ballot races. And it could also just be a sign. I mean, I think the Kansas one to me was particularly interesting because what we saw in Kansas was people organizing against a really restrictive abortion law, and they won. And the sort of read of the poll of the outcome suggested that it wasn't just that conservative Kansans had changed their mind. It was that liberal Kansans got out and voted. And this idea of kind of a return of prairie progressivism, I would not hate seeing that.
No, I think a lot of people would be enthusiastic about that.
I also think it's interesting. So my parents are longtime poll workers. They've been doing it for years. And so my mom was telling me just how like people also don't realize how certain voting restriction laws or voter suppression also hurts like the people who are trying to put those laws that are trying to keep out Democrats per se. So she talked about this man who came in to like vote for Trump and he had no ID on him, like none. And they're like, you don't have a driver's license. You don't have, he's like, I got my Costco card. And they're like, so that will not fly. And it's like, or other people that are like, I think I voted or I registered like 15 years ago. And it's like, there's a lot of like, not having information about how you need your vote to work, how you have to be registered, how in certain states you have to have your ID. And if you are a Republican and you don't have an ID, sorry, boo boo, you can't vote. Like, it's not just about restricting, people of color or young people. Like, it can hurt everyone when we suppress the vote or when we create barriers to voting. And so my parents are seeing that with just people who come in but the strong sense of entitlement toward voting and then get turned away because, they didn't do enough research to know what was needed.
Yeah.
There's something super exciting about this, by the way, that I've been seeing because, as you know, I consume a lot of right-wing media where they're mad about long lines in early voting. They're mad about people being turned away from those long lines. In fact, the Trump campaign did a lawsuit in Buck County, Pennsylvania, where they were like, no, you shut down the early voting line too soon. You have to reopen the polls for an extra day. They're mad about these things that are restricting access to the polls because they're actually focused on turning out voters and getting them to use early voting. And they're trying to turn out low propensity voters who are more likely to be tripped up by those kinds of limits to registration and ID and those sorts of things. And again, I don't want to sound too Pollyanna, but if there actually is a majoritarian move, a bipartisan majoritarian move to make voting easier, that's awesome. I am 100% for that.
Let's make it a holiday. Let's make it a holiday.
Get the whole month of October off.
We'll see. I mean, I think, some of this is just expediency and not a sort of principle.
But expedience can be an ally too.
Totally.
We'll take it. We'll take it.
But I do tend to think that in these late moments when there's so much information and so much stuff kind of that you could sit and parse and dig in on, it's really important to kind of, as you both have, like remember the sort of very basic sort of precepts of this race and of an election. And it's like, women are pissed. The economic malaise is real and people are really feeling that. And like, those are the two kind of main forces. One argues in Harris's favor and one argues in Trump's favor. And then there's other little stuff around the margins. I think a big one is that actually people don't like Donald Trump, Republicans as well. And the more he's in the news and the more he's kind of just like making people annoyed, the worse it is for him. And that's why I actually
offended.
And that's why I actually do think this Madison Square Garden rally kind of does move the needle in a way that in an election this close might actually matter. But, I think at the end of this race, it's like, whose campaign manager would you rather be, putting aside the politics and the sort of chaos? Like, I think the Harris folks feel like they've probably, within the sort of parameters of the race they decided to run many, many months ago, which you can ask, I think, some basic questions about that. But within the parameters of that, I feel like they got to a place where it's like, we've set ourselves up. Whereas the Trump folks are in pure chaos mode, which, again, they probably were that way and felt that way at the end of 2016, too. And so, who knows?
Yeah.
But,
if I'm a campaign manager for Harris, I feel pretty good. I feel good about the amount of money in the bank. I feel really good about turnout. I would feel really good morally. Do you know what I mean? Like, just in terms of like having a message that feels like it's not racist.
yeah.
That's the only way I can like, or that feels progressive. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that hits sort of like a bare basic sort of level of humanity.
Yeah.
I would feel good about that. Now, I wouldn't feel so confident that like it's in the bag,
Right.
but I would at least feel like this was a campaign, given the short amount of time they had to run it, a campaign they could stand by. It's not flawless, but darn near close considering she only really had 3 months. If you figure, what was this, July, August, where
It's about 100 days. She got it in
yeah.
late July.
Yeah.
I'm such an admirer of Stead Herndon at the Times. I think he's just a very astute political reporter. And he kind of offered some analysis this week that I think was, one, he was like, I think you'd rather be the Harris camp at this stage than the Trump camp in this sort of very final moment. But the other thing he pointed out, which is, I think, true, was that, my cat is getting in the way here. Come on, cat, move.
Not in the way. Joining in the fun.
I know.
My cat's the biggest Stead fan as well. So. But, he pointed out that, like, what the Harris camp did was months ago kind of position themselves as saying, okay, if we are going to offer a kind of defense of democracy and a sort of, indict Trump on all the ways that he wants to destabilize the way that we've been doing government for a long time, that is inherently a defense of the status quo. And there is risk in that when you're defending the status quo in a moment where people truly are, and for very good reasons, dissatisfied with the status quo, no matter whether there's an R or a D next to the name of the person in the White House, you're running a risk there. And there was potentially a path for the Harris campaign to be like, we also want to upend the status quo, but in a different way than that Donald Trump guy does. And they did not choose that path. And I think, the war in Gaza probably would have been the biggest way to sort of break with Biden and sort of show that they're willing to call out the status quo. But to me, again, like those basic questions are the ones to sort of check back in with right now. We have for all sorts of reasons, but we effectively have a status quo, anti-status quo dynamic going on along with all the other dynamics that we just discussed.
Yeah, I think that I would prefer to be the Harris campaign at this moment for a variety of reasons. Like if I were running the Trump campaign, which I would not be, but the things that would be making me nervous right now are late deciding voters are breaking for Harris by double digits. And the Trump campaign outsourced its ground game. And now there are all these stories coming out that the people who are doing the ground game, primarily groups led by Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk, don't know what they're doing and have a bunch of people who are scamming them. Like it's like full of grifters. And so the work isn't actually being done. And we don't really know, has politics shifted in such a way that, getting out and knocking on doors isn't as important.
Right.
Maybe that will turn out to be the case. But I would be pretty worried about that if I were the Trump campaign.
Yeah. Same.
But you can't exactly point to 2016 and be like they had their act together there, And
No,
so, but
true.
they felt like they started to get their act together in 2020, and I think they came into this race saying, yeah, we're going to build an actual proper operation, and it sort of deferred back to all of the sort of chaos agent stuff that just happens when Donald Trump is the head of your operation. All right. Well, let's give ourselves the rest of our Sundays back because we're going to have to sleep and hydrate and get ready for quite the long week. I guess we should tell
electrolytes,
listeners,
everyone.
We're gonna run something in the feed on Tuesday, which is Election Day. Probably something that'll just give you a little sort of a breather because I'm sure you'll be able to fill your head with plenty of other stuff from that day itself. Don't get stressed about the exit polls. I'll just say that, folks. Don't just tune out until 7 p.m. and then turn on whatever channel of choice, and then you can start to stress.
Maybe 9
okay?
9 p.m.
Maybe 9. Great.
But, like, make sure you at least have a television on by 9 p.m. You can obviously tune in earlier, but
Give yourself-
ration your consumption during that period.
And then we
Yes.
are going to, obviously, we have a regularly scheduled episode on Thursday. So on Wednesday, we're going to record a kind of reaction. Where are we? Most likely what do we not know kind of episode, given where I expect things to be going. But we'll record on Wednesday and have something on Thursday. So if listeners have questions as they watch results coming in on Tuesday night or into Wednesday that you want us to discuss, hit us up on social media. I will probably be relatively active on Threads, my new social media of choice. And so I'll be there chattering away probably Tuesday night and into Wednesday. But do either of you have specific plans for or rituals other than self-care for Tuesday night? Yeah,
I have to teach, and then I'm getting my hair done. And that's
yes,
That's exactly right.
just another Tuesday.
And then I'm going home to relax, and I'll do all the things that evening, but I'm trying to keep it very, routine and hang out with my kids, put them in bed, and then I'll go downstairs and I'll watch and fill my brain with all of the poll and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I have traditionally filled my election nights with deadlines and commentary and those kinds of things. And I'm kind of taking this one off. I'll probably join you, Jody, on Threads and Blue Sky. I don't traditionally use those, and Instagram, which is something that I do use more often, just because I really like the flow of election night conversation. But I'm more of an observer this election, which I'm actually kind of liking. I was invited to a couple of election night things, but I think I just want to, see what's happening, not have to perform in any way, either for a party or for a camera, and just see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, if
I've
you
got
don't
my
take
drink ready.
There you go. Yeah, that's I was about to ask. But look, if you don't take it from us, take it from. I heard an interview with Steve Kornacki, and even Steve Kornacki, who is the most wired-in person. Even Khaki Pants Steve said
Korkaki.
that on Steve Korkaki, there you go. That his most important ritual on election day is that he takes a 3-hour long walk on Tuesday afternoon and just sort of disengages. So if you don't take it from us, take it from him. But that is definitely the way to approach it. All right. Well, this has been fun. Thanks as always for doing this on a Sunday, you too. But Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
And thanks to everyone who's been listening and watching on YouTube. And we will see you soon.
Bye.
Radiotopia.